You're listening to The Knowledge Spot, your number one resource for sharing information that promotes success, personal development, and happiness. I'm your host, Jared Cherry, and my goal is to shed a light on the strategies, mindsets, and routines that have led to each of my guests' individual success. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen, and I hope you enjoy what we have in store. Hey everyone, and thank you for listening to this episode of The Knowledge Spot. Today, I've got professional radio broadcaster and writer who focuses on music. His name is Alan Cross, and I think it's safe to say, Alan, that you are best known, certainly in my case, for your ongoing radio show that happens to be titled The Ongoing History of New Music. And I'm wondering, Alan, for listeners who haven't heard of your show, because I do have a lot of international listeners, could you perhaps provide them with a brief description of what that show's about?
Yeah, it is a documentary that began in 1993. It runs an hour, and basically it talks mostly about things from the world of alternative music, but not exclusively. And it's kind of like a behind the music thing, except more fun and less serious with fewer drugs.
Right, and one of the coolest things about that show, at least from my perspective, and when I say cool, I mean cool for you, is that you've been able to not only communicate but study these great historical artists, whether they're new or old by whatever standards we're going by. And I'm wondering, have you seen any common themes amongst these so-called great artists?
No, not really, which is what makes it interesting. Everybody is completely unique, and all these individuals tend to make their own fun in their own ways. The only real common thread that I've ever seen amongst these artists, and this really only applies to the biggest artists, is that the bigger you get, the better an interview you tend to be. Two reasons for that. Number one, you've probably done a whole bunch of them. And number two, you realize that giving interviews to people in the media is part of your job. So there's no point in being a jerk about it. You might as well give the best interview possible to leave the journalist with the best possible taste in their mouth, resulting in what you hope is going to be a favorable profile.
And when you talk about a favorable profile, I'm wondering then, have you come across many artists that you've interviewed who are putting on a bit of a sham, perhaps a fake personality?
Oh, I'm sure I have, but I haven't really noticed it. It's difficult. I mean, the genuine ones. And I would put David Bowie in that list. I would put Bono in that list. I would put the members of AC/DC in that list. You know, these are guys who understand that they got to play this game. This is their job, talking to the media, and the very best of them know how to take an interview and quietly manipulate it to their own benefit. And there have been many times where I've interviewed some of these people. I went in with some things that I wanted to find out, and some questions that I wanted to ask, and I found myself completely manipulated down a road that they wanted to go down, and they did it so subtly and carefully that I didn't notice it until much later.
And would you say that this manipulation, whether it's intentional or not, would you say that it's almost made a lot easier just by the fact that your show is broadcasted through radio, and we all know radio has its limitations in terms of, locality, censorship, things like that. Do you feel like those kind of constraints maybe not hurt your interview, but certainly affect the direction in which they can possibly go?
No, I go into every interview realizing that I am a proxy for every fan of that artist. And what I hope to get is a nice, free-flowing, two-way conversation where I don't come in armed with a whole lot of questions. I come in armed with some curiosity. And if I do my job right, we end up having not an interview, not a Q&A, but a conversation that goes back and forth that often takes us into territories where nobody really expected. Those are the best interviews. When you talk to a guy like Bono, for example,
right?
What you'll start out with a couple of general questions going down some sort of general road, and then you know that he's listening very, very closely to your questions, and then he'll answer. And if you listen closely to his answers, you end up asking the next question, not the one that you have on the piece of paper in front of you, but a question that resulted from what you heard him say.
Right. You're actually listening.
You're actually listening, which is what I mean when you end up having this conversation. And those are the best. I mean, if you have an interview where you came in with 15 questions and you got to ask 2, yet the interview still went 20 minutes, that's probably excellent. Now, I'll give you an example.
Sure.
Kirk Hammett from Metallica. I mean, here's a guy that's been interviewed 1,000 million times by so many different people. And there's probably not a question he hasn't heard about Metallica, about the Black Album, about Saint Anger, about, what's it like to play, rhythm guitars behind James Hetfield, what Lars really like. I mean, there's a billion questions that have been asked a million times. Well, I found out that Lars is a big dog fancier. In fact, like him, I have 2 English Bull Terriers, which is a really odd breed of dog. So we spent our entire 25 minutes talking about dogs. And now on the surface, me telling you that story, on the surface, that sounds awfully weird. But what it did is it humanized him. Here's this big rock and roll star who turns into this puffball when he talks about his dogs and what he does with his dogs, what he named his dogs, what he lets his dogs get away with, what happens to the dogs when he goes on tour. How do the dogs get along with each other? Do the dogs like Metallica's music? I mean, these are all things that I had never seen in print, on TV, or heard audio of ever before. So I left that particular interview thinking, hey, that was a victory.
And that's beautifully put, and it makes me feel very confident in what I'm doing here. I would say you're one of my biggest influences when it comes to interviewers, and as you put it there, where you've really managed to humanize some of these superstar guests you have and create a two-way conversation. It's something I'm striving for here with the Knowledge Spot. And I love hearing that, that's the method to your practice where, you're obviously prepared for what you're doing, but you're also fully prepared to go with the flow. And I think that's part of what makes your interview so great.
Yeah, it's going with the flow. That's where it is, because you never know what kind of mood your subject is going to be in. Are they going to be engaged? Are they going to be bored? Are they going to be tired? Are they going to be high? Are they going to be drunk? I mean, these are all things that you have absolutely no control over. So when you walk into an interview situation, you have to be prepared for your subject to be in a variety of states.
Right.
And that's, the first thing that you do is assess what that state is and then go from there. It may take a couple of probing questions before you figure out exactly, okay, this is what I'm up against, or this is how this is going to be. How are we going to deal with it?
Right. And would you say that this technique you're using in your interviews, you've been doing this show since 1993 and you've done a lot of work before that even. Is this something that was a learned process, or when you started the ongoing history of new music, are you going right away, I know exactly how I have to do this and I'm going to do it that way?
Oh, I thought I was going to do it. I thought I had it nailed from day one. And that was, no, it's not true, because like anything, it's an evolving process. You go in with an idea how you might like things to be, but until you've actually done it for a number of shows or years, you realize that you are slowly developing a style and technique. And it may be very different from what you thought you were going to be and thought you were going to do. It's an evolutionary thing. When I talk to people who want to be on the radio, they have an idea. For example, studio students, they have an idea of what they want to be on the radio when they graduate. But I tell them that you really don't know who you are on the air for 5 years. It takes that long of working 5 days a week before you develop that personality, the one that's going to be with you for the rest of your career.
Now, that being said, that there's obviously a time requirement to this, there's that old saying, it takes 10,000 hours of practice to become good at anything. Keeping that in mind, would you have any suggestions beyond the idea of just being prepared to go with the flow for people who are, or, students, like you said, that are interested in pursuing a radio career or even just a podcast career, people who are interested in being interviewers? What kind of tips and strategies would you give them?
There are 4 stages that you go through with every single interview. And there is no way that you can skip any of these 4 stages. The first thing when you walk into a room with your interview subject is that you have to display propriety. In other words, you have to show that you are behaving properly. You're not overly familiar. You're offering them the appropriate deference. You're polite. You take the right seat. You're just not a jerk.
Right.
So once you have to just display propriety. Then you have to display to your interview subject competence. Okay, this person knows what they're doing. They, brought the right equipment. They're dressed appropriately. They are asking some of the right questions. They're making eye contact. They seem to have this idea. They're not there unprepared. They seem to be, at this point, a competent journalist, a competent interviewer. So that's number 2. As you behave appropriately and as you display your competence, you begin to instill trust. You begin to instill comfort in your interview subject. They begin to relax and go, okay, I see what I'm up against. I can kind of anticipate how well this interview is going to go. I can let down my guard a little bit. I can pay attention to the questions, and I can just sort of get into the interview. And then if you can get your interview subject to be comfortable, then they start to trust you. And once you achieve trust, they'll tell you anything.
That's very cool to hear, and I can't lie. As you're explaining these things to me, I'm going through my head. Oh my God, am I doing this right? Am I doing that right? And those are some cool techniques for sure.
Yeah, they've served me well for 30 years, and there are no shortcuts. If you go from propriety to competence to comfort to trust, you will always end up with the best possible interview. Now, it doesn't mean that every interview is going to be great, but it means that you are going to end up for the best possible interview for that particular situation. There are times you're going to go into an interview and it is going to be an utter hopeless disaster. However, you can mitigate any problems by following those points.
And to take the opposite side of the spectrum here, have you come across any common glaring mistakes that new interviewers make?
Oh yeah, I mean, the most common one is they have a whole bunch of questions,
right?
And they burn through all the questions one after another in sequential order, determined to get to the last question without really listening to the responses of the person that they're interviewing, missing all kinds of golden opportunities to create that conversation.
That makes perfect sense to me, and it actually it reminds me of as I started this podcast, perhaps one of my biggest fears going into it was, how can I possibly have a two-way conversation with these amazing guests I'm having on when they have no idea who I am and maybe they don't give a crap about what I have to say. And same goes to my audience. And if I could offer a bit of advice for people who are in that situation, it's that might be true. They may not give a crap what you're saying, and you kind of got to give it some time and let people get to know you. And that's only going to happen if you treat an interview, like as you said, as a conversation, something that's two-way, rather than just going through your list of questions and not really listening to what your interviewee is saying. Give people the chance to get to know you.
And here's the other thing, too, is that interviewers interview. Nobody's going to get to know you until you do a lot of interviews. That's the same thing with writers. Writers write, and nobody's going to know anything about what you write until you've written and written and written and written and written, and it becomes, available somewhere else to someone else. It's just a matter of practice. I mean, when I started doing interviews, I was horrible. I was just absolutely terrible. But the more you do, the better you get. And as long as you're willing to learn from your mistakes, and as long as you're willing to note what your victories are and build on those, then you'll be fine. It just takes time.
That's great to hear, yeah. And it rings true with any other endeavor in life, is that you just got to practice. Like you said, no one's gonna be great when they're starting off, and like you said just now, it's gonna take time. I'd like to shift this a little bit, going back to You mentioned, and I find this very interesting, that there was really no common thread between all these great musicians you saw, other than perhaps the biggest, best acts knew how to properly prepare for an interview. Can we take this from the opposite side? And you've also bear witness to a lot of bands that have imploded within themselves and failed. Is there any common threads there in failure?
No, there are reasons that are. Oh no, there's not really any common thread usually, but there are several ones that you can kind of, that are more common than others. I mean, there's substance abuse. There's creative differences, which is a very big one. There's somebody who just grows up and wants to move on. There's money issues and legal issues. But those are the big ones. I mean, a very wise person in the music industry once told me that the average length of a band's career is 7 years from when they form to when they peak to when they finally break up, and that's about right. And the example he gives is the Beatles and the Clash. Bands are around for about 7 years. They went through absolutely everything during those 7 years, and at the end of it, it was time to move on. So unless you're U2 or Radiohead or some other, or Muse or some other freaky band who has managed to stay together for decades, groups have life cycles. And if it's not the whole group, it's the members within the group. And you see bands having personnel changes. So it is, when you're in a band, you're in a bubble. And a lot of things that happen in this bubble don't happen to people in the real world. And the bigger you get, the weirder life becomes inside that bubble, because nobody is there to tell you no. And you travel from place to place around the world, and all you see are airplanes and hotel rooms and backstage areas and crowds from the front. And then there's, probably all kinds of weird excesses and habits that develop, and that takes its toll after a while. I mean, I do a bunch of business travel, and the longest I've ever been away from home is 2.5 weeks, and that killed me. I can't imagine what it's like to be on tour for 9 months at a time.
Yeah, that would be incredible. And it brings up an interesting point. A lot of people, when they take an old band and let's say this old band's just released a new album and it sounds nothing like their old album, the band's often criticized for, you guys don't sound like you did before. And I always try to tell these critics, listen, if you were in the position that they were just in, like you said, where you've been traveling for 9 months around the world, do you really think you're going to want to talk about and sing about and write about the same stuff you did 2 years ago, even though you've had a gazillion different experiences then? It's like we can't have this expectation that a band is going to consistently sound the same. And I would even argue that some of the best bands are the ones where you see that evolution in the type of music they enjoy producing.
Yeah, I mean, a band is going to be hot for a finite period of time with a certain approach. If the band does not evolve, either creatively, image-wise, or personality-wise, then we're going to get bored of them and move on, because it's the same old thing all over again. It's very, and musicians create music. What they want to do is grow as artists. And, if they grow as artists or in a particular direction and the audience doesn't seem to like it, well, I mean, they get kind of discouraged and pissed off. So, you can't expect your favorite band. I mean, let's look at the Beatles. If the Beatles had stayed the same from what they were doing in 1964, they wouldn't have been the Beatles.
Not at all.
So it's very important to allow a band to evolve. Now, if we look at a band like The Clash, I mean, The Clash began as this angry 2-chord punk band, but by the time they got to the Sandinista album, they were doing things that were decidedly non-punk. They had actually moved the needle. They had moved the goalpost for what punk music could be. Would you criticize them for that, for helping that music evolve into a brand new direction? No. But it's you're always going to get critics, people who say, "Oh, I wish the Smashing Pumpkins stayed the way they sounded on the Siamese Dream album, because that's when they were at their best." Well, okay, maybe you really like the Siamese Dream album, but could you imagine 15 of those albums? No, it would make no sense whatsoever.
Exactly, and I almost I would say it's actually a very fine line between this evolution that's natural and good for the progression of a band, but also you need a willingness to stay true to who you are. So maybe that's not necessarily your roots, but there is a the band that comes to mind to me is the Beastie Boys. You pick up any Beastie Boys album, every single one of them sounds different, but at the same time, there's something there that you go, besides the way they sound, you just know this is the Beastie Boys, and it's like they've stayed true to themselves, they've been honest, but they've shown us that they can grow as musicians at the same time.
Yeah, and they took an awful lot of criticism for the Paul's Boutique album, because when it came out, people were just absolutely appalled at that record. They wanted another License to Ill. They wanted more goofy frat boy rock. Well, the Beastie Boys made a really, really conscious decision to not be that novelty band that brought them to number one in 1986. They wanted to be taken as seriously as artists. So in order to do that, they got together with the Dust Brothers and they started exploring the concepts of sampling. And they ended up releasing this record, which was critically panned. I mean, the guy from Capitol Records that was in charge of that record was fired because the Beastie Boys album was so, quote unquote, horrible. But now we look back on the Paul's Boutique album and we see that it was 3, 4, 7 years ahead of its time. And now we consider it to be a major masterpiece. So, yeah, that's a really good example.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to say I think it also speaks to a larger phenomenon in life where if you're in the process of changing something very critical about yourself, whether it be your art or your personality, you cannot expect people to immediately understand and perceive this change as positive. There's always a quote I like to say, and every time I say it, I'm afraid I'm butchering it, but it comes from Gandhi, and he said, first they'll hate you, then they'll try to hurt you, and then they'll love you. And, the Beastie Boys album is a great example of that, where, like you said, it comes out, everyone hates it, except maybe a few diehards, and then I think just like a couple weeks ago, the Beastie Boys were brought back to that Capitol Records building for some sort of ceremony, right? And I think a big part of that ceremony was the success of Paul's Boutique. So it just shows you, right? Like you got to be patient.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happened. Sometimes, I mean, you look at a guy like Nick Drake. Nick Drake was a singer-songwriter who killed himself in 1972. Never really sold more than 5,000 copies of any album that he released. But over the decades, people have gone back to those records, thanks in large part to a Volkswagen commercial that aired at the end of the 90s. They went back and they realized, oh my God, this guy was a folk singing genius. And now he sold far, far, far more records in death than he ever did in life. And it's sad, but these are the things that happen.
Exactly. And I guess you personally, Alan, you've had to experience maybe not on the same level as, let's say, a famous band or musician, but you yourself have admitted in this interview alone that, things didn't always start off so smoothly with your interviews. You've made mistakes and you've learned from them. But like a musician in a band, your voice has been something exposed to the public. So you were forced to, in these early days when you were making these mistakes, you were forced to endure a certain level of criticism, similar to these bands. And I'm wondering, what advice do you have for anyone who wants to pursue a career where they have to put their voice on the line?
I'm still getting criticized. It's something that never goes away. There are always going to be people who challenge you, or people who, for whatever reason, often irrational ones, don't like you. When you do this for a living, you become a public figure, and public figures are subject to the whims of the public. You're going to have some people that really, really like you, and then you're going to have some people that really, really hate you. And then you're even going to have some people that are looking to find ways in order to hurt you. It's especially bad when you have social media now, where Any little indiscretion can be blown up into something that makes you look like a horrible monster. But it just comes with the territory. And one of the things that you have to do if you're working in media is that you have to believe in yourself. You have to have this idea that, no, I am a good person. I am doing the best that I possibly can. I believe in what I'm doing. I believe in how I'm doing. And I'm just going to let the bad stuff bounce off me until such point where I either A, can't take it anymore, or B, those people hurling the bad stuff are proven right and that maybe I should quit.
Interesting.
But it's you. And the other thing is that if you're going to believe all the good stuff that people say about you, all the praise and all the kudos and awards and all that sort of stuff, if you're going to believe that, well, then you also got to believe all the bad stuff that people are saying about you. So I choose to go right down the middle, not pay attention to all the compliments and not pay attention to all the insults.
And right.
This isn't to say that I'm not grateful for the compliments. I am. But I certainly don't build my self-worth on them. I think to myself, oh, that's nice, and then move on.
That's great to hear. And I think, again, once you're touching on a greater phenomenon. We're living in a society, at least in Toronto, North America, where we're being constantly bombarded with this idea that you got to think positively. You got to think positively. And yes, that has its benefits. But like you said, when you're someone who's after the chance to become a public figure, you're going to be exposed to this negative criticism. And something I've been forcing myself to do is, like you said, somewhere down the middle, look at the positive, take some of it, and, feel grateful for it. But then also look at these negative things I'm receiving and see where they're right. Can I grow from what they're telling me? Are they actually helping me in the long run here, rather than just purely focusing on the positive?
Completely. I mean, there is such a thing as creative criticism and constructive criticism. If you hear somebody say something, you may want to look at it and go, there may be something to this. I will remember that for the next time I engage in this particular activity. Totally cool.
Exactly. And this is a good segue to a time that maybe you don't feel entirely comfortable talking about, but I think it's worth bringing up. And again, if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, that's totally fine and we can drop it. But I'd like to talk about how in 2011, so for the audience members who aren't from Canada, Alan, he works for 102.1 The Edge, which is a very popular radio station here in Toronto. And in 2011, he was fired from his job. And Alan, again, if you don't want to delve into this, is fine. But I'm wondering, was this firing based on some very specific character criticisms?
No, this one was strictly a reorganization of the radio division. And I will be honest, they did try to make some accommodations for me. The accommodations at that time were not acceptable to me. So the option was to take a buyout, leave the company, and go try something else. That's what it is. Now, I had been at Chorus Entertainment in the radio station 3 months short of 25 years. So it was a very long time, and I managed to dodge a gazillion bullets in that quarter century. Eventually, my time came up. There it was. Yes, I was hurt and angry and all the rest of it, but that's a natural thing when somebody takes your job away. But in retrospect, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because what it forced me to do was re-examine what I was doing for a living, what I wanted to do for a living, and whether or not I wanted to work for somebody else. So I became, by necessity, rather entrepreneurial, and have for the last 4 years run my own business, my own self, rather well. I mean, I've had a chance to do things over the last 4 years that I would have never had a chance to do if I had still been a full-time employee of whatever company. And now, what happened a year ago, CFNY The Edge came around again and said, look, things have changed. Would you consider coming back? We negotiated something, and I went back, and I'm still there, and I've got another 2 years on this particular contract. I am not an employee. I'm a contracted employee, which allows me to continue to do all the other things that I had established during the 3 years that I was on my own. And it has been a very harmonious situation ever since.
That's beautiful to hear. This podcast, or me in particular, I'm obsessed with the effects of depression and failure. And a common theme we've had in every single guest, and every guest fits the category of what I would call successful, and every single one of them has either undergone some sort of major setback or failure, and every single one of them has maybe not used that failure as a tool, but learned from it at the very least. And I love how, in your case, at the time, if I thought Alan Cross, let's go back to 2011, I'm thinking Alan Cross, all I associated you was the ongoing history of new music. And when I heard of your firing, first of all, I thought The Edge was crazy, out of their mind, because that was one of the best shows on The Edge. And I used to listen to it. I was boxing at the time, and I would come home, I would commute home, and I wanted to hear something like productive, educational, not just mindless blabber. And my mom's a big fan of yours. When she told me they canned you, I was like, that was the stupidest thing they could have done, because I'm just not going to listen to the station now.
Well, it did happen, and there was a lot of blowback, and it lasted, a couple of weeks, and then it all went away, and people went on to do their own things.
Exactly.
And that happened in the middle of the summer, so I took a couple of weeks to sort of lick my wounds, sort of feel sorry for myself. And then I thought, no, you know what? I've got all this equity, all this brand equity. How do I capitalize on it? And that's what I set out to do. And again, because I didn't have to go into a job every day, I found opportunities that I went on a coast-to-coast tour of theaters as a co-host on a show starring William Shatner. I mean, I got to go on tour with Captain Kirk.
Wow.
Really? That's just awesome.
And this reminds me of a quote I've heard you mention before, where you said, "He who dies with the most stories wins."
Absolutely.
And it's almost like this failure, like you just mentioned, it gave you this once in a lifetime story, and I'm sure it's given you many others. So I always want to embed in the audience to understand that there's always going to be setbacks and failures in life, and you really have to change your perspective to almost see them as a good thing, at least in certain ways.
There should never be anything that fear is no reason for holding yourself back.
Right.
So, and as one person once told me, that once you reach what seems to be a very difficult and insurmountable situation, you know what the answer is? Just keep going.
And I would say, this is again a quote I've heard from you, where you've developed a skill that you would consider timeless. And I suppose in your case, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that your timeless skill, it clearly has to do with your personality, your interview style. And that was a direct consequence of, just continuously interviewing and pursuing what you love. Would you say that is the key for anyone looking to develop this timeless skill, where they can come from a job, get fired, and feel okay, feel strong to bounce back because they know they're worth something? It's just a matter of finding what you love in life and putting the time into it?
That's part of it. That's definitely a very big part of it. But one of the things I used to say about people who were very, very upset in their jobs is that, you know why you're that miserable in your job? It's because you don't have enough debt. This was the case with a lot of radio people that I worked with and who worked for me. They would be so passionate about everything that happened at work that they kind of lost themselves into what was really important. The moment they got married and the moment they got a mortgage, it was like, oh, okay, that's right, I'm doing a job. I should maybe put my energies elsewhere and not get so upset over whether or not I have to play this one particular song as part of my job.
Right. It's like, so you're saying that that's a good thing to start accepting. Maybe you'll have to do things you don't want to do every so often.
Yeah, and put yourself in. Listen, it's all perspective, and if the only person that can make you upset is you. You choose to be upset by something. And every once in a while, something comes along, like a mortgage, which makes you realize that, you know what, there are more important things than the thing that was upsetting me or the person that was upsetting me. So I'm just going to ignore that and move on and really take care of what's important to me and my family and my life.
Right, I see what you're saying now. It's like it's very common to see these people stress out over the smallest things, and it's really like you said. It requires a shift in perspective to realize, okay, like you said, maybe in your case you have to play or interview a band you're not a huge fan of, but it's paying the bills in some way, and you can actually tolerate it.
I'm not working in an office in a cubicle.
Exactly.
There are way, and there are things. There were way worse jobs to have. So shut up. That's what I tell myself a lot.
That's great to hear. So then I'm wondering, Alan, at what point in your career did you go, "Oh my God, I've done it. I'm working a job that I love and I'm actually going to be financially stable doing this." Is there like a certain moment that clicked with you?
Okay, those are two separate things.
Interesting.
I knew from the beginning that this was a job that I loved.
Right.
So that was not the issue. This is a job that I loved, and if I work really hard, maybe one day I will become financially stable. That's how it worked. And I worked hard and long, and eventually it became. I got lucky in a number of positions and a number of points in my career, and I eventually became financially stable.
Right, and I think, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I hear you say you got lucky, whenever I hear people say that, I was in the right time at the right place, yes, that's true, but I always attribute the fact that you were in that time and place based on a reasoning that you put in the work required to get there in the first place.
Every decision that you make ends up influencing where you go. Every decision I've made up until this moment has put me in touch with you for this conversation. And there's something I call dumb luck. Dumb luck is that intersection of hard work and opportunity. The problem with dumb luck is that you don't always recognize it. It could be that a life-altering choice, is right in front of your face, but for whatever reason you choose not to acknowledge it, or you ignore it, or you miss it. And I'm always telling people to be on the outlook for dumb luck.
Be aware of it.
Be aware of it. You have no choice as to when it happens. You just have to know that every once in a while, something is going to come up across your path, and how you react to that is going to have life-changing consequences.
Now, would you say a method, at least for ensuring that you'll come across that dumb luck, is it replicating what you did, where you chased something that you knew you would love, knowing full well that the rewards would not be immediate, and being patient?
Yeah, exactly. That's totally it. Completely, totally, utterly it.
And I want to again stress that this is such a common theme we're seeing is every single guest of mine has, first of all, they've not been born into money. They've experienced failure, and they recovered from that failure, perhaps not in what most people would call the optimal way. Maybe they had to take out a big loan or ask friends for some major favors, but they stayed patient and also erred on the side of positivity, kind of like how you said, where they were at least thinking, if I work hard enough, this will pay off eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, and if it doesn't, have the strength and wisdom to say, okay, this isn't working, let's try something else.
And that's so important, again, right there. I've seen multiple times, and I've mentioned this before in prior episodes, I've seen people err too much on the side of positivity to the point where it becomes an egotistical thing. So, I've seen entrepreneurs find something they love, go after it with such intensity and force that they trick themselves into thinking this will work, despite the fact that they've received, in my opinion at least, enough feedback saying this just isn't possible. And it's like their ego gets in the way and they become stubborn. They say, no, I love this. It's got to work no matter what I do. And it's almost like you just keep building a bigger hole that way.
Yeah. Sometimes the greatest strength that you require is to let go of something.
Would you be able to perhaps shed some light on when you would know you've hit that point where you just have to give up?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a couple of jobs where I've had within the radio business where I think, you know what, this isn't for me. It doesn't feel right for me. It is against my nature, and I've really tried to make it work, and all it has done is made me miserable. So I'm going to make a career shift within what I'm doing to take me away from this, so that I will not be miserable anymore.
Right.
And that's after, giving it my best shot and realizing that there were certain things that were beyond my control, that were never going to change, and I could fight against them as much as I wanted to. I was still going to be miserable. And I didn't like the person I had become. And it was, okay, I'm going to change. And it was difficult because there was a lot of benefits that went along with what I was doing. But those benefits did not outweigh how I was feeling about myself. So goodbye.
Right.
And that was hard. That was really hard. Because again, like you said earlier, there's ego involved.
Yes.
It was a really good position. It was a really cool thing. But it was not good for my health. It was not good for my relationships. It was not good for anything.
And it sounds to me like it's this willingness to give up. It stemmed originally from just this feeling of almost certainty, knowing that it's not going to work out the way you want it to, doing what you're doing.
Yeah, well, you had to realize, finally, come to terms with the fact that it wasn't going to work out. That's important too.
Exactly.
And that sometimes takes an awful long time.
It's a skill. It's that awareness that you brought up before, just like how you have to be aware of when you've come across these strokes of dumb luck, as you called it. I believe that awareness is a skill you have to take with you to the negative situations as well, and understand when you've taken something too far and you're not doing yourself any favors.
That's true. That's absolutely, utterly true.
And this is something I always talk about too, is that when we're talking here, this all sounds so simple to my listeners. They go, okay, obviously I know when something's not feeling right. And I always want to stress this to people, that these ideas that we're talking about right now, they may seem simple in theory, but I guarantee you in practice, they're actually extremely complicated. And there's a real dichotomy there between grasping a situation or a phenomenon mentally and actually applying the correct physical manifestations rather to counter them. So what I'm trying to say here is, don't expect this to be an easy process just because it's simple.
No, if it was easy, everybody would do it.
Exactly.
And if it's worth doing, chances are it's hard.
So when you interview these musicians you've interviewed, have you ever seen failure attributed to just a unwillingness to engage in the hard part of the work?
Oh yeah, all the time. These guys live in bubbles, and they think that the idea they're going to be a rock star for the rest of their life, and that because nobody has told them no, and because they're indulged in absolutely, everything. You can see that they're heading down some sort of road to destruction.
Do you feel like the position that you're in, where you're able to speak with these people and also be aware of these flaws you see, do you feel it's your responsibility to bring these issues up with them and at least try to help them be aware, or is that totally none of your business?
It's really none of my business. I can observe. I can make yeah, I can observe, but I'm not going to change their behavior. That's the job of their bandmates. It's the job of their manager. It's the job of their spouses and significant others. There's nothing that I could say that will change their lives. I mean, as far as they're concerned, I'm just some person annoying them with questions. There's no way that I have no currency whatsoever to be able to engage them on an emotional level that deep so that they might change their behavior.
Interesting. Some of the guests I've interviewed beforehand have been mixed martial arts fighters, and there's a common theme in the most successful mixed martial arts fighters where they reach a level of success that's so high where everyone around them becomes this thing we call yes man. And it's exactly as you said. It's like they're in this bubble where everyone's telling them, yeah, you're doing the right thing. Look how much it's worked for you now. And it's amazing just how detrimental these people that seemingly think they're helping you are actually being.
Mike Tyson used to have a guy named Crocodile, and his job was to follow Mike around saying, Mike, you're great. Mike, you're awesome. Mike, you're the best. That was his job.
Wow.
And if you need somebody that is going to do that for you, I think it maybe tells you something about how you've gotten into a weird spot.
Right. And I guess the advice I would give to people who are perhaps interested in supporting, let's say, someone they're very close with in their whatever endeavor they happen to go, there's a fine line between being positive and lying. And I think as a supporter, you definitely need to be aware of when you're crossing that line and make sure you're mixing that dose of positivity with a dose of honesty too. Because if you're really interested in helping someone, it's necessary, in my opinion, at least.
Yes, I agree.
Right. I gotta say, Alan, this interview, it feels like I'm the Padawan talking to a master right now, if that makes any sense. Because I'm looking over my question sheet and going, should I even be looking at this right now? You know, I'm listening to, and it's just I just want to talk again about this skill you've developed of becoming an amazing interviewer. Do you look at other interviewers as inspiration?
All the time. Oh, yes. And everybody's different. One of the things that I suggest everybody do in my line of work is find a number of virtual mentors. Listen to them, deconstruct what they do, learn what it is about them that you find appealing, and then steal all their best stuff. When I talk to broadcast students, one of the people I tell them to listen to is Rush Limbaugh. And they look at me like I'm crazy. I go, no, just don't listen to the politics. Listen to the technique. This is a guy that can build a monologue that can start from an innocuous place, build to a crescendo, and then come to a conclusion without the benefit of phone calls or guests or interaction with any other people over 17 minutes, speaking mostly extemporaneously. That is a skill. If you can do that, you have superhuman broadcast powers. If you, for example, want to know what it's like to do a listening interview, watch Larry King. Now, Larry King has been a rather doddering sort of interviewer for the last number of years, but he made a very big point for many, many years of his career that he would not prepare for an interview other than some absolute utter basics. If an author was on, he wouldn't have read the book. If somebody was on that was part of a celebrity cachet, he would have a basic idea of who these people were. But his thinking was, I am like the viewer. I am curious. I want to know more about these people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions like a normal person would ask. I'm going to listen to the responses, and I'm going to carry on a conversation that will hopefully give me a non-varnished, real-life view of who this person is and what they stand for. Now, the difficulty in that is that you can sometimes end up asking some really stupid questions because there were things that you really should have known going into the interview.
Right.
But that's the downside of it. The upside of it is that you have a very You often have a very refreshing interview with your subject telling you things that are not on script. And I think that's brilliant.
Right, and I know as we're talking about this idea of finding a virtual mentor, as you said, or perhaps just a mentor in general rather, and extracting the techniques they used. I know for a fact I'm going to receive some emails saying, Jared, I don't want to do that because then I feel like I'm being a sellout and I'm not being myself. And my response to this,
Wait. Let's go. Let's just explore that.
Sure.
So, why would they ask this question?
There's this theme in our society, at least that I've noticed, where I come from the world of music as well. I'm a drummer, and a common theme amongst musicians is this idea that you need to have your own unique style, that you cannot be relying on the techniques or approaches that the masters before you have set. And I think that's flawed personally, but that's where I would say that question is coming from.
Okay, look at Picasso. Picasso says, great artists steal.
Exactly.
What you do is you look around and see who is the best. You find 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people that you believe, that you find absolutely super appealing. You feel a connection with them. You feel that they're doing something really, really good. So what you do is you take the best bits of what all these other people do and incorporate them into what you want to do and what you want to be. And you end up creating something brand new and unique. I mean, there were about a half a dozen radio announcers that I listened to growing up. And I dissected every single bit of their presentation. And I took the best bits of all of them and I tried to make them part of something that I wanted to create. So when people say that, oh, I'm selling out, I'm not being true to myself, listen, you don't know who you are until you start looking around at what everybody else is, and then you judge yourself against by the abilities and talents and failings and foibles of everyone else. And that's how you create an interview style and a broadcasting personality. So to those people who think that, shut up. You're delusional, and your ego is already in the way of your success.
Exactly. It's 100% an ego thing. It reminds me of an interview I've read with Chick Corea, where he states, in the beginning, all he did was steal the work of other guitarists and, use them. And from using their techniques, he eventually came across his own spin on these techniques and became Chick Corea.
Yeah, completely true. I mean, look at David Bowie. David Bowie sampled 1,000 different styles, from Little Richard to mime to ballet and to kabuki art, and he took all the best bits of that and became David Bowie. David, and that construct, that David Bowie, all those personalities that he assumed in the 1970s.
Right.
Those were unique constructs that he came up with based on influences. Everybody has influences. This nonsense that you can emerge out of nowhere and be 100% unique and set the world on fire is crap. It doesn't happen. What you do is everybody is like a rap song. You find your beats, you find your bass line, you find your raps, you find your rhymes. And if you do it right, it sounds different than any other rap song that's ever been created, even though you're using a lot of the same parts.
Right, and I want to stress again just how much of the ego is getting in your way if you start thinking that you're just a special little snowflake that can learn on its own. It's one of the biggest mistakes I see with aspiring musicians when they're trying to learn a new instrument, and the first thing they say is, I'll ask them, so who are you studying with? And they go, oh, I'm just teaching myself. I don't need a teacher. I immediately see the ego there, and it's obvious in this case, but
that's lazy.
Exactly.
I don't want to take lessons. That's no fun. Well, okay, you know what? There's a certain amount of stuff that you can do practicing on your own, and there's not such a you
Definitely.
can do that at the beginning because you're playing and you don't realize there are any rules. And when you don't realize there are any rules, then you end up doing things that you're not supposed to do. And maybe some of those things that you're not supposed to do turns out to be things that are absolutely awesome and are going to change the world of music. It does happen. Happens in guitar all the time. But I mean, if you're going to be a working musician, you need to know how a guitar works. You need to know how chords are constructed. You need to know different tunings. And sometimes what you need to do is find somebody who knows how to do that stuff and to teach you what a hammer on means, would teach you how to bend the strings in a particular way, teach you how to, tune that lower string in a different ways that it creates different chords for different situations. You're not going to stumble on all those things yourself.
Right. And I think it's worth noting that sometimes that attitude, it's not even necessarily a lazy thing where it comes from, but it's actually a fault in at least what I believe to be the school system, where we're given this perspective on life where, you can do it. It's all in you. It's up to you to figure it out on your own, and we're all capable. And it's you need a shift of perspective, in my opinion, when it comes to that. Because what you're essentially saying, for instance, if let's say you want to learn the drums and you're saying I don't want to take drum lessons, what you're saying when you tell me that is that you believe you are better than the hundreds of years of knowledge that have come from percussion before you, and that you don't need it.
Yep, that's right. You don't need it. Wrong. You do.
Exactly. And again, we can apply this just like you said with interviewing skills or anything else in life. It's just the importance of a mentor is so critical that it can't be ignored, in my opinion.
Yeah, completely. Absolutely. And why should you go on your own when there's plenty of opportunities to get help?
And would you say, though, Alan, at the same time, when you've reached a level of mastery like yourself, is there a point where, I don't want to say you stop learning, but I want to say you start recognizing what maybe wouldn't work for you and it's not worth learning from?
I'll say this. Yes. I mean, how do I answer that? The moment you start to coast is when you start to die. The moment when you start focusing on the past is when you start to stop moving forward and start to die. Where you gain wisdom is these are the things that do not work for me. And I know this to be true because I've tried them multiple times and I've ruled them out. But I'm always looking for new things that will continue in my growth. If I fail to find new things that allow me to continue to grow, then I'm in trouble. And my time is limited.
I love that. It's what I hear from that is, somewhere in the middle, know that once you become stagnant, you're essentially dying.
Yeah.
So have a willingness to learn, but at the same time, almost know who you are, be willing to try things and recognize, again, put it aside when this just isn't me, it's not working. I'm not going to let my ego get in the way here. It's not who I am. Push it aside, move on.
That's exactly it. Again, you have the strength to drop stuff.
Great. And I think that's a good place to end the interview, Alan, because we are running out of time. I want to thank you so much. And again, just say how much I feel like the Padawan here right now. And I'm truly honored that you took part in this.
Well, part of the reason I do these things is because you're coming at it from a completely different position and perspective than I would. And who knows what I may have learned talking to you, from you, and what I may have learned about me, talking about me to you.
That's great. It's what you're saying again. It's having that open-mindedness. You took a shot with me. You had no idea what you're getting into. This could have been, I hope it wasn't horrible. And again, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to give me a hand with this and be part of this. That being said, Alan, where can people find more about you if they're interested in learning?
I would just go to my website, which is called thejournalofmusicalthings.com. I spend far too much time updating that thing. But that's where you can get a hold of me, and you can see a lot of what I'm doing and where I'm at and where I'm going.
And any Twitter or Facebook or anything like that?
Yeah, Alan Cross on Twitter and Alan Cross on Facebook.
Great. Thank you so much again, Alan. You have a great day. That's it for today's episode. If you guys like what you heard, follow us on Twitter at _thekspot.net, search for The Knowledge Spot on Facebook or SoundCloud, or check us out at www.thekspot.net. Lastly, if you guys have any questions for me, I plan on doing my own personal Q&A sessions through YouTube, so email me at contact@thekspot.net.